we're going to pass over to Andy and then Tricia, who are going to help us to get ready with the first provocation. What do I do when things don't go to plan? And I'm going to stop sharing now because I know my colleagues like to be in control of their own slides. So first and foremost, over to you, Andy, but just one note. Tricia, who's going to wave wildly now, is our timekeeper for the day. She really doesn't want to have to say to you, stop talking, but she will. So please help her to feel okay about that by keeping an eye on the time. She'll probably private message you or do things like that in the corner if she thinks that you're bumping up against the end. She's doing it to me right now. So I'll pass over to you, Andy. I'm going to spotlight you as well, Andy. So you're about to find yourself very big on the screen, and let me know if you're okay to go with the slides.
Okay. Right. I think I'm okay. Right. What do you do when things don't go to plan? This is for those people who said they might be daunted, worried, exhausted, disorientated, frustrated, or felt overwhelmed on this project. And I welcome you because you belong in the real world of FE. So you've got the right person talking about this because nobody's made more mistakes than I have in doing action research. And somehow it all turns out remarkably well, because for the action researcher, there is no hell. Just before we look at what isn't going to plan, let's just have a look at some of what we have achieved so far. We've got teachers introducing really meaningful changes in their classroom, and that's fantastic. And the learners are being inspired, they're engaged, they're thriving. And we've got some strong work and research relationships. These are interesting because they're between teachers and teachers, they're between teachers and learners, between teachers and support assistants, and some really interesting ones where we've got learners doing research with learners, and that's being successful. But there are still some challenges. So there are the unanticipated findings that we have, when our taken for granted assumptions about what ought to work isn't quite going as planned. That actually is very good action research in more cases than not. We do have some less than expected management commitments that not all managers have found it straightforward to provide the support which they signed up to when they backed your proposal. There have been some frustrations occasionally in getting teams on board where teachers have been, colleagues have been frustrated in having to prioritize their teaching, and we're in the early stages of getting learner feedback on some projects, and that's part of what today is about. Is about helping you get orientated, so that you can get everything you need out of a project. There tend to be two dimensions of the messiness people find themselves in doing research. There is the fundamental action research one, that as I research, the issue I'm researching keeps shifting. And then there are those unanticipated events that invade a project from time to time. Now, refocusing is classic action research, because if you think about it, we start off investigating our actions and action research, we act on what we find, and then we have to sometimes change direction to investigate new actions. So if you remember Amanda's story that we shared with you earlier on in the project, she intended to have her learners engage in peer assessment, giving each other feedback and guidance and marking each other's work, but she discovered some of them weren't aware of the errors others were making. And even at times they were mistakenly advising them to change correct interpretations. And this is what happens. We recognize that class. We've all taught that class of learners. And because of that, she changed and she discovered that they liked working together, but obviously peer marking wasn't the way forward. So she got them doing some peer support where they worked on creating creative vocabulary. And from that, the learners could work much more constructively together. And this will happen. You will need to change from time to time as what you thought you were going to discover isn't always what comes out. So there will be some changes there. So that's one type of messiness. The other type of hiccups are caused by loads of things. Technology gets in the way. Either you haven't got it, or it's not working, or it's not working as planned. Promotion can be a problem when project leaders have been promoted away from the projects. How do they still keep in touch? Colleagues can be, as I say, difficult to access. Families get in the way from time to time. You know, you've got all these different priorities. We have a pandemic, in case nobody noticed. Unfortunately, we've got redundancies occasionally. All these things come in the way, and they were never intended. But for the action researcher in the real world, it's really important to realize that action researchers need the courage to change the things they can change, the patience to live with the things that they can't change, and the wisdom to know the difference. Now, in achieving this, your mentors are going to be crucial in helping you develop courage, patience, and wisdom. Now, this might sound, you know, rather, dare I say, boosterish at the moment. You know, you might have a significant distrust of boosterism, and understandably. But what I would like to do is just to say, look, it's a lovely time to reflect and regroup. And I'd like you to consider, at the moment, you might feel that you are sitting at the bottom of an action research hill or an action research mountain, and you have to get to the top of that. But what I would like to do, and this is probably in the spirit of the ghost of Christmas future, is to take you to the top of the hill and have a look down. And to do that, I'm going to stand on the shoulders of the giants of the OTLA 7 researchers, one of whom we have speaking with us later this morning. And I'd like to share with you what they reported about their action research from the top of the mountain. So when we were finishing OTLA 7, we asked researchers, how have your views of how students learn changed? And these were some of the answers they came up with. The relationship between the teacher and the student is important. I knew that, but sometimes who the teacher is isn't who you may have thought it is. Now that baffled me a bit at first. You know, I was trying to work out, does this teacher mean that she thought she was the teacher, but it's the students who have been able to teach each other? Or does she mean the teacher who I thought I was has changed? So really, she's saying students can be teachers. She's also saying, somebody else, sorry, is saying Each learner is an individual with amazing strengths. My role is to find the missing piece of each jigsaw and empower them to progress. Another one, overwhelming students turns them off. A narrow focus can yield results. Small wins give learners confidence. It's important to take into account the learners' viewpoints of what works for them. Everyone is different. Another teacher, every learner follows a unique journey. And another one, they have a love of learning we assume they didn't have. And when I read this, I was struck by the huge degree of affection and appreciation for learners that obviously wasn't apparent even to experienced teachers when they began the project. And they've learned such a lot about how students learn. I then asked them, what have you learned that will change their practice next year? And there's a nice one for us English teachers. Don't start with Spark. Learners like being involved in research and seeing the teacher learn as well. Giving a bit more ownership to the learners. They've told us how they learn best and what topics interest them. Students like giving feedback about what worked. I'd include more time for students to feedback on their learning next year. I've learned to focus on a small area to make big overall changes. Don't try to change the world in one goal. Another one, reluctant colleagues are worth the time spent working out why. Help, don't judge. And what's fascinating here is when asked what they'd learned that would change their practice, they weren't coming up with a technique like slow writing or a bit of technology like use Jamboard or English websites. They weren't talking about techniques, but they were talking about their approaches, and crucially, they were talking about changes in relationships with learners and relationships with colleagues. And finally, we asked them, what have you learned about your subject? And there's a nice one here. I've learned that not everybody's as passionate about maths as I am. This has changed our delivery approach to make lessons more meaningful to the learner. How much more we need to do in the English team to help learners in other areas. We don't need to hammer home technical accuracy to develop writers. How much more there is to learn, isn't it wonderful? Some methods we've been blindly using for years might not be the best. So once again, it's about self-discovery and about putting colleagues and learners ahead of subject loyalties and subject identities. So what I think we're getting from the top of the mountain, what people learn from doing action research, is that action research is different is a different form of research. So whereas conventional research asks what's happening here, action research asks, how can I improve what's happening here? So what we would want to reassure you is your project is not about what information you need to produce for us. It's not about you finding out how other teachers ought to change their practice. It's not about you having to write a report about the research you've done. Your project is about what you learn about yourself as a teacher or leader, and how you can put that knowledge to good use. It's about your professional development. And I'll stop there because I would like to invite Tricia to contribute her experiences of the messiness of action research, of what happened when everything didn't go to plan. So please be reassured, be supported. We're here to make you a better teacher. And if we can help you in some way become more confident, to help your learners help themselves, then we will be perfectly happy with that. Tricia, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Andy. Claire, I'm going to share my slides from here. When Andy said, learned what happened when everything didn't go to plan, that is precisely the correct word order there. Everything didn't go to plan. But I can tell you what was planned. What happened was I was quite unexpectedly asked if I could support a school in the far north of Canada to help their readers. And the funding fell through, but I was already excited by the thought of working up there. So I just offered to volunteer my time to work with some young people. And also I thought, well, I've been hanging out with OTLA people for so long now, it's time I did my own action research project. So I was thinking, it was during one of the lockdowns, and the questions that kept coming to me were, how do we do that reading thing online, and how do we work in small groups? And because I decided to ignore Andy's doability criteria, I thought, why not do both at the same time? What could possibly go wrong? So I volunteered to work with a group of young people. I was given a group of 5 young people to meet up with in Tugalik High School in Nauyat, Nunavut in Canada. Now, let me tell you what happened in the first session. Well, what went well? Now, I've just, in order to do this, I went and found the notes I took after my first session, and I cannot recommend enough keeping a really brief diary of what happens when you're doing your action research, because there are things on this that made me laugh and cry that I had actually forgotten. And probably just out of self-preservation, part of it. But I'll tell you what went well, because I've got it written here. I gave them a photo of my street. Now that's the town. There's a picture of the town you can see on the slide. I gave them a photo of my street, which from Google Street View, that was just, it's green and the trees, and you can see they're well above the tree line in Nauyat. So the boys hadn't seen, they don't see trees ever. We talk about trees quite a lot, actually. I took them through, I put the 3 words up on the name of their school, the name of their town, and now I didn't even know the right terminology at this point. It's a hamlet, the name of their hamlet, Nauyat, and the name of their territory, which I had always, everybody in Canada, every non-Inuktitut speaker says none of it. We've always said that. Well, they actually ended up laughing because they didn't know people couldn't say Nunavut. They didn't know that we didn't know those things. So the first session, they got to teach me something. I think that really broke down barriers. And when I asked them, I thought, I better, ask that classic question. What do you do when you're not at school? What do you like to do? And one of the lads said, hunt. And I thought, they'll be hunting rabbits or something. I said, what do you hunt? Narwhal, polar bear, beluga, seal. And then I realized, okay. I'm quite out of my depth here. I am really out of my depth. I'm an old youth worker. I know, I'm really comfortable working with teenagers, all that stuff, but I'm out of my depth. And what didn't go well, actually, the whole thing about working remotely and working in a small group, I completely lost control. It was I hadn't had that feeling since being an NQT, where you're teaching a class and that the sweat is running down your spine and you've totally lost control, and clearly your lesson plan has disappeared within about 6 seconds. I just want to tell you what I actually wrote on this. It was far too long. The tech was awful. I couldn't see or hear them. The resources meant I had to scrap the reading part of the lesson altogether. They were impatient and bored, but it really wasn't their fault. And my reflection says, this is why I'm glad I wrote this down. It was embarrassing and stressful to be so completely out of my depth. Isn't learning painful? So that was my first session. Now, where was my support? Totally unexpectedly. My whole idea of being on Zoom, I was on Zoom, but they're not. It's run by a whole separate organization, and this young woman who's got 6 years of teaching experience up in the far north sits in the background of every session I have because she's running the IT. And when we turn the cameras off, basically, she said, well, that went pretty well. And I thought, okay, I need to know more. And she just sat and talked me through all the gaps that I have or a lot of the gaps I have in my knowledge. And then the next day, I called my usual support person in Australia to talk to about this. And she just laughed and said, it sounds like the teacher didn't have the cultural capital to have success in the classroom. And I don't know, in FE, I don't know if that's been as big a deal, but in 2019, cultural capital was built into the secondary framework in England, with the idea that we are supposed to give our students the cultural capital, the way of speaking, the way of writing, the way of communicating, the knowledge of culture, to be successful in life according to somebody's criteria. And really it was perfectly reversed in my case. So there's it's Cisco that delivers it. That's how I sign in there. So what couldn't be changed, I can't change the IT setup. They are watching me on television and there's no interaction. So you can get all excited about handing over the mouse and Jamboard, but I can't do that. So that's just reality. We had to work something out. I had an hour a week. That is all I had. And so I had to work with that. But we could make some changes there. They're extremely short-staffed. If you are a trained teacher and want an adventure, talk to me. I'll tell you. But because they're always looking for teachers in Nunavut. But I have one lovely teacher who supports me, and we've got to know each other a bit. Resources, here you go. I'd missed the cutoff for shipping before the sea froze. There's something you don't think about for sending resources. So we were really, really limited to what we could have. And I think the biggest thing was that these young people, I'm Canadian, they're Canadian, but they're ESOL learners because they speak Inuktitut at home. They go to school, they do all of their schooling in Inuktitut till they're 9. So by the time they're teenagers, they've actually not done school in English for very long. But that was a huge game changer. Now, what could I change? Well, some of the logistics. We've finally managed to figure out how to get them close enough so that I could hear them, even if lessons going on in the background. That gets challenging. I did figure out how to get them. They went finally and got whiteboards, dry erase boards from the primary school, because I said, I just don't know how I'm going to do this. And I had to say right off the bat, this can't be about working in groups, because I could see that these young lads needed some one-to-one work. So we agreed on 3 of them with the best attendance, 18 minutes a week now. So my expectations were low. And I just have to say, I could change my lack of cultural capital. That's what needed to change. I needed to really understand who I was working with. And that's been a fantastic thing, especially the language when it comes to using the sounds of the language. That has been very interesting. And the biggest change is my action research project was no longer about, in 1 hour, my action research project was no longer about working online with small groups. Instead, it became about adapting what I know is a successful reading approach for Inuit young people, because just because it's successful for kids in the north end of Birkenhead, what needs to change for Inuit young people? So there you go. That's right off the bat. I was defeated, slightly humiliated, but I wanted to keep going. I was really interested in then what we could do. But I just want to have this as an amusing aside about cultural capital. I got then overly conscientious about worrying about working with young Inuktitut speakers. I said to Claire and Vicky and Andy, I was telling them about worrying about emojis, because Kimberly, my new support person, had said, watch their faces. If it's negative, positive, they'll scrunch their noses, and positive, raise their eyebrows. So I got all worried that I couldn't use emojis, because what if they don't relate to our emojis? And one of the boys was reading the word crunch, and he looked like he didn't quite understand what it meant. So I said, when thinking, oh, get a good example when the snow freezes and it crunches under your feet. And he looks at me and says, like eating chips, which are crisps in Canada. And I thought, yeah, so let's explore really what it's like. There's the co-op ad for this week. And this is a note, just don't read 9 p.m. if you don't want a Coronation Street spoiler. That's all I can say. There's their TV schedule for yesterday. Yes, it's very different, and but also it's very much what I do know about Canada, and I have to sort of relax into that a bit and not treat them as precious Inuit artifacts, but boys negotiating life in an interesting environment. Okay, what have I learned? What have I learned, and why is this better than I ever expected? It's not ideal. I've been, for years and years and years, senior leadership has been asking me in high schools if they could deliver that reading thing during registration. I've been saying not if you value your students. But in fact, I've learned that 18 minutes a week can lead to improvement, and I know that because teachers are noticing, and they're also noticing that these boys have a new confidence in trying, which is something different. I would have to be here for a very long time to explain what education is like there, but it's got the lowest graduation rate anywhere in Canada, in the territory of Nunavut. The suicide rate 6 times the rate in Canada, which is high like it is here. It's a very hard place. So anybody who comes with any enthusiasm for education, it's noticed by the teachers. A couple of weeks ago, one of the lads came in and just said, "Hi, Trish." And I know that's not a big deal, but it is when you're building relationships with very, very shy boys. And now I had been pushing the fact that hi, I'm Trish, rhymes with fish. So I think that's how they remembered it. But still, to say it with enthusiasm was heartening. And the fact that they were given a choice. There was a big assembly where there was cake and music. And I said, look, you don't have to come if you want to go and be with your classmates. And even though they ran out to grab some cake and come back, they did want to come. And for now, I'm treating that as feedback in the absence of exit slips. Lots still doesn't work very well. Lots and lots. I still get extraordinarily nervous. But we've just had this positivity come out of taking little tiny steps to make it better. I've got to call time on myself soon. The underlying principles of relationship and safety and all those things are built into that reading thing, and I know those are going to work with anybody. But so the small things have to be about improving the experience for Inuktitut speakers. So I'm adding every week, trying to really think of vocabulary that better reflects life in the north. Consonant clusters like str and splut, they don't have any in Inuktitut. There are no consonants next to each other, and U is never a, so they can't even hear the sound when we talk about it. And Q is a letter on its own. QU isn't a combination. So that's something I don't have to concentrate on with native English speakers. It's quite interesting. Writing simplified text, so writing about hockey rather than fish and chips for those who are the least confident reader. This is the kind of thing we're doing, which is quite, and that was lovely. When as soon as he read Slapshot, his eyebrows went up in a very positive, this is for me way, which is lovely. So where next? Oh, I gotta go. Partly because it went so wrong, I've now met the Nauyat teachers this week, and I've been invited to go up there. We'll see what happens. And this has led me to thinking about using these approaches which are used in Australia, that I can better support the people who are using TRT with Indigenous language speakers there. And finally, reversing it to actually help them because they don't read well in Inuktitut. It's been an adventure, and it started with a desperate, awful failure. And we'll see where it goes next. There you go. That's what I'm about to say to you. I've been practicing this, but I have to read it. Kuyanemi Marialuk, which is thank you very much.
Oh, that so many things to think about there. I'll take the spotlight off you, Tricia, so we can all come back together. A couple of things I noted down is that we rarely learn what we expect to learn when we undertake action research. Yeah. We find ourselves going down paths that are utterly unexpected, and that's what makes it so glorious. And there is no going wrong. Andy always says, doesn't he, there is no hell for the action researcher. I know you're quoting someone from a long time ago, Andy, when you say that, but it's true. Every time something doesn't go according to plan, it's an opportunity for us to understand not only why isn't it going according to plan, but what plan was I planning here? I had a perception in my mind of what effective practice might be. How did I form that perception? What makes me think that the fact that they didn't do very well in this progress test means that they're not learning something? Am I focusing too much on assessment and less on wider aspects of learning? And as we move into our breakout activity, I invite you to think really critically about everything that you're doing. As Tricia has had to think very critically about approaches that she's used for a long time, and be prepared to change and shift them and ask herself, is that the right way to do it? Am I making assumptions? So let's all ask, why do I think that's effective practice? Why do I think that's good teaching? Why do I think this is good or not such good evidence? It's so very important that we can be in control of our own views. I know we do that with teachers, but sometimes there are such powerful discourses in our sector that we have to stop for a minute and ask ourselves. I had to stop when we first started looking at phonics in post-16. I was brought up into a world of teaching where it wasn't considered to be something we did with adults, and that's a conversation for another day. And lots of time with Tricia and other brilliant specialists helped me to shift my perceptions.